A lot of you on the line probably know that world-class coaching is a topic we're truly passionate about here at Challenger. We found in all of our research studies that coaching is a critical tool for staff development. And yet we know it's not going that well at most organizations. So why should you care? I want to dig quickly into some of the research at a very high level that's available on our website. And then we're going to spend the majority of time on the true takeaway that I want you to have from this webinar, which is coaching to communication styles. So over the past few years, probably the past 15 years or so, frankly, we've known that coaching is a very important tool for the entire company. That's been proven time and time again to lead very effective outcomes in the business world. And the service and support organization is no exception. In fact, what we've learned is that coaching is the #1 driver of rep performance. It's literally the best thing that organizations can be doing to improve the customer experience that's being provided by your frontline staff. It's far more impactful than simply focusing on retaining good staff, recruiting high performers, and significantly more impactful than training staff, which I think is where most people tend to go when they see a performance issue. If that's not enough to convince you of the value of coaching, it's also one of the top drivers of rep retention. Things like job opportunity are always going to kind of rank #1, that chance to grow in the company and increase your knowledge and your responsibilities. But coaching plays this incredibly big role in keeping people in seat, even more so than pay relative to market rate. And what we mean by that is, assuming that frontline staff are being offered pay competitive with other companies in the area, staff will sooner leave a company if the coaching and development deteriorates or is poor than if salaries do not increase. So hopefully you've seen now coaching is incredibly important, but why is it important to get it right? Reps are reporting that 22% of supervisors are bad coaches. And at first glance, you might be thinking that's not that bad. I mean, 22%, that's fewer than half. But what we know from our research and about driving performance through effective coaching is you have to be doing it well, because poor coaching is going to harm performance twice as much as good coaching is going to help it. And so all of a sudden, 22% is a really alarming number, especially when you're thinking about many supervisors who have 15, 18, 23 direct reports, who are the folks who are interacting daily with your customers. So before we dive into big solutions, I want to talk about small changes. And I'm going to go completely off topic and talk about, of all things, golf. We love sports analogies here at Challenger. I am not a golfer, but I'm very passionate about what this analogy is going to show you. So this is Justin Thomas. Justin was #1 on the 2020 PGA Tour. I'm sure some of you on the line know that. He had an average score of 68.76. He made $7.3 million. It's good to be Justin. In comparison, this is Bo Van Pelt. He was number 219 on the PGA Tour. He had an average score of 72.67. And he made through golf $50,000. So let's just do a quick side by side. We've got Justin with that average score of 68.76 and Bo with an average score of 72.67. That's actually pretty close. You've probably noticed that. It's not even a 4-stroke difference. It's really saying that Justin is about 5% better performance across the board. But when we look at the pay, there's a slightly wider gap. It's actually about a 14,000% difference, over 14,000% difference in the result that Justin is getting from those 4 strokes. So I'm sure there's some golfers on the line who are chuckling and saying, shaving 4 strokes off your game. I mean, golfer would love to do that, and it's not that easy. But it just does shed some light on just how minuscule that difference is and how big a difference in ROI you're getting. And also, Despite being far better than the average golfer, I'm sure that Bo is working with many coaches who are helping him to identify small changes to his game that will yield him those 4 fewer strokes. And frankly, so is Justin. So let's go back to coaching. Similarly, incremental changes can yield those tremendous results. Changing the way that you think about how your direct reports react under stress, or how they want to be rewarded, or how you look at a spreadsheet. We know that all contact centers love their data. How you look at these spreadsheets and see beyond the numbers, see the behaviors in your direct reports that are leading to those numbers on the page, and thinking about how you want to improve those behaviors, change those behaviors, coach on those behaviors. So I'm sure some of you are curious what our framework for coaching looks like. Let's dive into that briefly before we talk about communication styles. So this is Challenger's integrated coaching framework. I want to start quickly in the middle with flex and communication styles. It's in the middle because it is our always on skill. You're meant to be doing it at all times, really when you interact with anyone, but especially in coaching. That said, let's put a pin in it because it is where we're going to spend the majority of our time today. Starting up at the top, we have research and understand development opportunities. And this is what I was just speaking about, is really thinking through what are the 1 or 2 or 3 development opportunities that you need your direct report to focus on, that you want to be coaching on for the next month or so. And how do you actually drill down to the behaviors that are impacting that opportunity? So we do teach a rigorous root cause method to make sure that we are moving beyond what we call spreadsheet coaching. And I'm sure plenty of you are familiar with it. It's frankly not really coaching. It's really just taking a look at the dashboards and saying, well, Amy, you got to get your CSAT up. You definitely had a big dip in the last month. Let's move the needle on that. And I'm left thinking, all right, I'll try. And another sports analogy that's not altogether different than telling a pitcher on the pitching mound, hey, you need to throw more strikes, or telling the batter like, hey, let's run that home run play that you've done once or twice. That'd be cool. So again, like thinking about how we actually identify the behaviors that we need to target. From there, once you know what you want to work on, we would have a scheduled coaching interaction. And this is where most supervisors, I think, are spending the majority of their time, but we want to shift that. We want to say, like, let's not spend the majority of our time here. Let's make this a very specific conversation where we're setting those expectations. We're having a handshake on development on the 2 or 3 things that we're going to work on. Let's make sure you feel bought into them. And we want to do that through asking really good open-ended questions that get the direct report to self-realize, like, yes, this is something I should probably be working on because I do want to improve my performance. And when you get there, it makes it so much easier to move to step 3, which is integrated coaching, that on-the-job learning, where you can say, hey, Amy, we agreed that we were going to work on your active listening. I think it's impacting your CSAT. So I'm going to actually do some sidejacking with you Monday at 2:30. Don't jump back in the queue just yet. Let's just make sure that we pull up briefly on those development opportunities and see how we can keep moving the needle on it. And I can be a thought partner for you. So that is our integrated coaching framework. And I know some folks might be thinking, okay, well, in listening to you, Amy, I'm realizing we are doing more of that spreadsheet coaching or more of that performance management. What do you mean when you say actual coaching? So I want to show you our definition of coaching because I think it'll help you kind of see some daylight in between those other activities that are also important that supervisors do, but just aren't coaching. So our definition of coaching is an ongoing and dynamic series of job-embedded interactions between a supervisor and frontline staff designed to diagnose and correct or reinforce behaviors specific to that individual. And you've noticed by now that some of these are bolded. So let's talk through why they're bolded, because those are clearly things that we think are very unique about our definition. So the fact that coaching is ongoing, it's not just this single event. where you say you need to change something. That's a feedback conversation. Coaching is really about this continuous improvement effort. And it says here, frontline staff never graduate. You always want to feel like you're being coached on something. It's dynamic. So coaching evolves over time as frontline staff needs and situations change. And I think, the reason that we show on the previous slide that it's a cycle is because, once you've made significant progress in one development opportunity, you can move that one off the table and move on to the next development opportunity and continue growing. We have job embedded. So that's where I say it's really that side-by-side, knee-to-knee coaching. And obviously that looks a little bit different right now. We'll talk about that a little bit later in remote environments, but it's really meant, the spirit of it is that it's really meant to be integrated in real time with your day-to-day workflow, so that coaching interaction can immediately impact the next customer interaction that's about to come through. The word diagnose, this is what I was just talking about with root cause analysis. It's really about properly identifying those development opportunities and through consistent interaction. And then behaviors, I've mentioned this several times, but it's about the application, not acquisition of skills and knowledge. It's concerned with doing and not simply knowing. Now, one thing on here that isn't highlighted is that it's specific to that individual. And I'm calling this out because I want to be clear that coaching doesn't have to be and should not be uniform in order to be consistent. It's important to have that consistent perspective and approach, but each coaching interaction should be tailored to an individual and their specific development needs, which is where I want to really start diving into how we flex communication styles to fit the needs of your direct reports, because everyone has a different way that they prefer to communicate. And we have a really great framework for thinking through how to just make, again, some small tweaks to how you interact with your folks. So these 4 lists of adjectives roughly describe the major communication styles that exist. Of course, it's a simplified view, but the 4 types are pretty comprehensive. Every person on the line here has a dominant communication style. They're true north. And you're probably looking at this thinking, well, some of the descriptors in list A match me, some in list C match me, but there's probably one list on here that's jumping out to you more than others, that would really embody how others think of you. Maybe your boss or your best friend or sibling, your direct reports, your spouse would perceive you. So as I look through the list for myself, I think there's a few things in list A that I would say I definitely try to be very supportive. I try to be very reliable. I know I'm not very patient, so I don't think most people would describe me that way. It's probably not my list. And where I actually end up landing is this D list. I am independent, candid, decisive, practical, efficient, and determined. So take a moment, look at the list, start to think about what letter at the top you might identify with the most. And let's move on to another way to be thinking about how to diagnose you and talk through the framework that we use so we can see where and what these lists of words actually correlate to. So here we have 2 ways to think about, 2 polar opposite ways to think about how people communicate. Are they ask-oriented or are they tell-oriented? And most people think, well, if somebody's asking a question, they're always kind of ask-oriented. But sometimes questions can sound different. So to give you a very clear example, people who are ask-oriented might say to a friend, to a spouse, where would you like to go to dinner? Whereas somebody who's tell-oriented might say, tell me where we're going to dinner tonight. Very simple language tweaks, saying the same thing basically, but one is very ask-oriented and one is very tell-oriented. Similarly, we have people who, when they communicate, are very relationship-focused or task-focused. And I like to think of this in two ways. When I'm working on a team, for example, and I'm trying to think about, like, is this person relationship focused or task oriented? I think about where their head is at when they first start working on the team. And is it, great, who else is on the team? Who's working with me? Versus, great, what's our goal? What's our process going to look like? What's the due date? What are we trying to achieve here? And those folks would be task oriented. So if I put these together on an axis, let's start talking about the different quadrants here. If we look at people who fall in both relationship and ask oriented, we would call these folks amiables. And that was that list of descriptors, that they're loyal, cooperative, supportive, sensitive, patient, and reliable. They're amiables. They are people who are much more relationship focused, empathy focused. Now in the lower left quadrant, we've got also the people who are ask oriented and task oriented, not relationship oriented. And those we would call analytics, very process driven people who love to get into the data to understand what are the steps. They crave knowing the behind the scenes and understanding it fully. Again, that was that list of adjectives that they're detail oriented, thorough, serious, methodical, precise, and deliberate. Now moving to the upper right quadrant, we've got our expressives. They are relationship and tell oriented. These are the people who a lot of people would say are kind of the life of the party. And that was that list of descriptors. They're outgoing, enthusiastic, influential, playful, spontaneous, and ambitious. And then we have me, bottom right, the drivers. So people who are tell-oriented and task-oriented, and are very independent, candid, decisive, practical, efficient, and determined. So one thing that's kind of cool is when we teach this in a classroom, we actually have people plot themselves and where they fall, and then talk a little bit about what they really like about working with people in each quadrant, and what makes it challenging, because each of these quadrants have their own particular things that might make them a little bit more challenging to be aware of. So you might be thinking, how do I take all this great intel and actually adjust how I work with these folks? So let's take a look at each communication style individually. So adjusting to amiables. Amiables, when we do this in the classroom, what we hear frequently is, you know, they are the ones who are very supportive, very patient, great teammates to have on the team. They make sure everyone's voice is heard. They sometimes can be a little slower to make decisions. They sometimes aren't very honest about their true feelings and kind of what I say, go along to get along. And so when you're working with an amiable, it's really important to invite their opinion, provide assurances, show personal involvement. And the most interesting one here, because I personally can't understand it, they like to be rewarded with private recognition. Anything public really makes them uncomfortable. And again, like I said, this is why it's important to understand that, you know, where they might end up going along to get along, that's why it's so important to make sure you are inviting their opinion. You're making sure that they're saying their true feelings. When we're teaching amiables, we like to teach with stories. So you can use hypothetical stories or personal experiences, but that really helps them kind of see exactly, paint the picture of what's trying to happen. Now, one of the things we'll talk about with all four of these communication styles is their stress response. And we like to mention also, if you are still having trouble identifying which corner you might have been in the previous slide, those stress responses are probably a good indicator for you. What do you do under stress? Because we all flex our communication style. We all probably move corners throughout the day sometimes, throughout certain relationships sometimes, but we can't typically hide our true communication style under stress. It's just a reaction, a gut reaction that we have trouble suppressing. So amiables, when they are under stress, we like to say that they acquiesce. They want to make sure everyone else is happy, so they're more likely to just say, you know what, my feelings don't matter as much. It's fine. I'm just fine. They say fine. So they'll comply with those plans, even if there's underlying disagreement or uncertainty. And so again, that's where that ideal coach reaction is really to ask, to solicit thoughts on how to accomplish goals and to provide personal attention. Let's move on to analytics. Now, when you're working with analytics, again, these are our data lovers, the people who really want to understand things fully. It's important not to interrupt them, to explain those processes fully, slow down the conversation and make sure that they have time to think through what it is you're saying and what their feelings are about it. And they like to be rewarded with increased responsibility. Teaching is probably no shocker here. They love to teach with facts and reasoning. So for all the analytics on the line who probably liked the data I was sharing at the beginning of the webinar, they're probably thinking, okay, where on the website are the actual graphs? I need to see the data behind everything that Amy just said. So again, I would focus on why performance guidelines actually work, allow time for independent review of them, and just make sure that you are always kind of giving them the behind the scenes data and what it is that you're trying to achieve. Their stress response is to avoid. They kind of get lost in that data. They'll just kind of slip away, and you won't hear from them. That decisiveness kind of turns to evasion, both of people and deadlines. So it's one big thing to be aware of, that if you're not hearing from an analytic, it's probably because they're stressed. That ideal coach reaction is to empower them. So make sure you're setting clear deadlines, goals, provide all those relevant details, the facts and reasoning that we were talking about, and allow time for that independent review. Moving on to drivers, the best quadrant, obviously. So when you're working with drivers, you always want to be a little bit more direct. We kind of say that drivers very much are a get to the point quadrant. So you want to directly address the issue, speed up that pace of conversation, provide clear timelines, just lay it all out there. And reward with tangible incentives, make sure that they understand exactly what they're going to be getting. We say teach with examples, so focus on how those performance guidelines work and provide direction, but let them fill in the details. They love to kind of be in power and make sure that they have a role to play in the task. Their stress response is that they become very autocratic. They dictate. Sometimes it's said that they may bulldoze others, and I can definitely identify that with that. I know, 7:30 in the morning when I'm trying to get my whole family out the door, that's where I know I become very, very autocratic. And now I can recognize that in myself and think through, okay, how am I going to prevent that so that my last impression that I leave to my entire family is not screaming, Amy, like, get your shoes on. The ideal coach reaction here is to advise. So you want to set final deadlines, but provide freedom for them to create their own structure within that deadline. So, you don't have to do all the work, which is great news for everyone, but you definitely want to make sure that they understand when it needs to be achieved and let them fill in those details. Lastly, we have expressives. So again, expressives, we kind of say like they're the life of the party. They like to have a few laughs as they work with you. They're a lot of fun to work with. They're the ones who typically make company culture feel really special in a lot of ways. So with expressives, it's important, keep that informal tone. It's something that when you become too formal, they may tune out a little bit. Mention personal information. They want to feel like everything is personalized. Focus first on big picture, because I think while, you know, they do like to have a lot of fun while they're working, they are ones who can get distracted easily. So if you bring them back to that big picture, say, let's lift up and think about what we're trying to achieve here, and then drill down to those details, because if you start with the details, they might get lost in some of those. And unlike amiables, they are the ones who really do like to be rewarded with that public praise. For how you teach them, we say, you know, typically just get them involved. We say teach with role plays, allow them to really perform during development sessions, allow them to use their own examples. Their stress response is that they attack. So they'll identify, or they'll defend their ideas aggressively. They may become judgmental. They may personally criticize. So that's one thing to be aware of if they're saying, you know, I actually think the reason I have this issue is because you haven't set me up with this and this and this. And if you can prepare for that conversation and how it can turn defensive, you can have the right next questions or right next steps that you want to take if that is to happen. And that's where you might go back to some of the teaching with role plays, like let's play this out for a moment. The ideal coach response, therefore, is to depersonalize, you know, remove yourself from the discussion. If they are saying, well, it's you, okay, well, let's talk about, you know, if take me out of the equation and what we might have done with me in the equation. Let's think through how you want to approach this. Now, with those 4 communication styles, I know another hot topic that might be a great takeaway that some of you might be curious about is coaching in a virtual environment. So a couple of quick things to think about, somewhat obvious here, but provide reps with your undivided attention in a virtual environment. It's so easy to multitask. I'm sure some of you on the line have already been checking your emails, and I get it. We don't have those kind of 4 walls where you're sitting and staring at me talking to you. We're in that virtual environment, but research shows that people can really tell when others are multitasking, and that's really bad in a coaching environment. So remove those distractions and view your virtual meetings as close to face-to-face meetings as you can. Like we said, customize your coaching to meet your reps' communication style. So each interaction that you have with your reps should meet their desired communication style, and that's even more important in the virtual environment. Especially, you know, a lot of us are leaning towards sending more emails and things like that in there, and just, you know, not taking into account communication style and the tone can be devastating in some of these coaching conversations. And lastly, promote that positive team morale. So fostering a remote rep community could be a really great component to keeping the culture alive in the situation that we find ourselves in. So by doing this, reps not only feel like they're still part of the company, but also part of the team. Some cool ideas that we've seen from other clients are designing a buddy system, e-communities through internal social media, you know, Teams channels and things like that. And including remote rep corners in company newsletters. So let's just recap really quickly on some key takeaways. Now, like all times, but now in particular, it's a great time for coaching. You know, I think a lot of people are thinking, well, if we can't be face-to-face, it's more challenging. Maybe I'm off the hook a little bit, but now it's probably more important than ever. We know that coaching drives the performance improvement. It's the #1 driver of rep performance. Even making small changes to your coaching approach can yield tremendous dividends. So I'm really hoping that you've taken some few things from this Flexing Communications tutorial and you can use them later today. That would be my personal dream come true. Coaches need you to connect with them as individuals, and so you should flex your communication style to accommodate the coachee. Thank you all so much for joining me today. We'll look to schedule follow-up discussions with anyone who wants to continue the conversation or has any questions that we didn't get to today. A recording of the session will also be available on our website shortly. Thank you all for joining me, and have a great rest of your day.